Today I'll start off and cover the slope solver. So let's see. First thing I'm going to do is name my Bloodhound file. All right, today's the 26th. There we go. All right. And let's see, I'm going to start working on the logic template here as well. So let me create a new logic template. I'll give this a name. All right. And let's add a slope solver here. All right. So I'm going to connect that in. Now, all solvers default to some kind of indicator, right? And they all default to the SMA 14. And I just happen to have an SMA 14 on the chart. And let's see, yeah, it's going to be the white line here. So let's make that a little bolder. So the slope solver, with all of its default settings here, is pretty simple. If your indicator is pointed up, it's going to give you a long output, right? And if your indicator is sloping down, it's going to give you a short output, right? Typically, that's how most indicators work, right? If an indicator, such as the stochastics, when it's sloping up, right, that's indicating that price is moving up typically. Same with the MACD. So all the solvers, kind of default to, if something is moving up, then your output is going to default to a long output, such as that. So that's what we're seeing here on the chart. Let me stretch this out here. So sometimes you really kind of have to stretch things out to see what's going on, but you should be able to see that the SMA 14 is barely sloping down for just a couple of bars here, right? Then it slopes up, and we can see here on this one bar there's no output in Bloodhound, and that means that the indicator is actually perfectly flat. So keep in mind that Bloodhound calculates out to several many decimal points, right? So Bloodhound doesn't round things off, and actually, NinjaTrader doesn't round off the calculations either. But if you do look, if you look at an indicator, either on the right side of your chart here, you can see that NinjaTrader does round off indicator values to whatever the instrument is. So since this is oil, NinjaTrader is going to round off these indicator values to 2 decimal points, right? Because oil trades in 1 penny. However, truly the indicator isn't rounded off. It's only the display that NinjaTrader gives you, right? So also same with the data box. So the data box, Ninja rounds off the number in the data box, but the indicator itself, the value of the indicator of these moving averages or the value of the stochastic and MACD, they're not truly rounded off. They go out to many decimal points. It's only that Ninja just rounds it off for a visual display. So, all right, so when Bloodhound is detecting the slope, the slope could be very, very minor. So if you do get no slope on your indicator, it truly is really, really flat, going out to several decimal points there. So now let's see. The first settings here in the parameters kind of allows you to set some requirements on how much of an angle you're looking for, or how much of a slope that you're looking for here. So let's see. I guess the easiest way to kind of look for a minimum slope. So if we're looking for a minimum slope on our indicator, what that will do is it'll kind of cut out these flat areas here. So we can see that, let's grab that circle, right? So it does look like our SMA is a little flat here. So if we require a minimum slope, then what we can do is we can flatten out, or we can get rid of this kind of flat zone here. So this is kind of one way that you can detect if price has been consolidating, right, is by looking at a moving average and seeing if that moving average is flattening out. So let's see, if we're looking for, let's see, if we need a kind of a minimum slope of our SMA, usually for moving averages, I usually start off using a value of 0.1 ticks. And let's put 0.1 ticks in there. Now you can see with 0.1 ticks, we kind of got we got a couple more bars here with no output, and that's telling us that the slope of the SMA is less than 0.1 ticks. So if I up this a little more, say if we go to 0.2, right, a few more bars. Yeah, a few more bars went away there. And let's see, since oil, when you're setting a slope by ticks, this setting is greatly going to be influenced by the instrument. So since oil moves in 1 penny increments, basically 0.2 ticks is 2/10 of a penny. So that is really flat. So I guess let's do something probably a little more reasonable. Let's just go to 1 penny. So 1 tick is 1 penny in the oil, something like that. And we can see that, right, that really cut out a lot right now. So basically we're considering all of this now to be flat, where there's no output here. Let's kind of look back a little bit. Alright, so all of this is considered flat. So, you might say maybe 1 penny is a little too much, so we can adjust this back to something a little less. We'll cut it in half. Right. So when you're using the slope solver, I hope you kind of see that what you have to do to use the slope solver is you will have to go in here and kind of play around with these slope values, with these tick values, to kind of see, what you like, what is your preference. So it does take some finessing to kind of find out, a good working value, right? Because it's all, so this, this maximum and minimum slope value, it's going to depend on, right, 2 variables. One is the instrument, what's the tick size that the instrument moves in, right? So something like the ES, it moves in a really big tick size, 0.25. So the ES would probably need a lower value. Yeah, I think that, yeah, the ES would require a lower value. So, but since oil moves in a very small tick size, we're going to be using slightly larger values here. And the second factor is the indicator itself, right? So some indicators move faster, move more than other indicators. So let's take a look back here, and yeah, so point 5 seems to work, I think, pretty good for an SMA 14 on oil. All right, so if we took this and we moved it to a different instrument, such as the ES, for example, we probably will need to go in here and adjust this because the ES has a different tick size. So, all right, so we have two values here. So when I set both of these values the same, right, the minimum slope and maximum, minimum slope and the maximum slope, when I set them the same, what that accomplishes is it kind of gives us this digital output, right? So you can see there's absolutely no output down here in Bloodhound. So if I remove the minimum slope and just leave it at 0, what happens is you can see we have this analog output. So now the output is telling us, that there is some slope. So if I stretch this out, let's take a look at these couple of bars here, right? Since everything's really stretched out, we can see that the moving average is actually sloping down a little bit here. And the output is telling us that as well. Right? So the output is telling us, that there is a slope on here, but it's not quite sloping enough. It's not sloping enough to get to 0.5 ticks, right? So the output, it's almost there to 0.5 ticks, but not quite, right? So, leaving the minimum slope at 0 and adjusting your maximum slope allows you to use that fuzzy logic part of Bloodhound. There, let's take a look back here. Yeah, so right here, right, we can see, there is some slope to the SMA, and the output kind of shows us that slope there as well. But it's not enough to give us a signaled output here. So it hasn't quite reached 0.5 ticks yet. So, right, so that can be useful, because it does give us some visual feedback that that the moving average is sloping up, but it's just not sloping up great enough. So let's see, let me adjust my snap mode here. There. All right, let's see. Okay, the period slope. This is, let's see, this can get difficult to explain because it's kind of hard to visually see what's going on. But what this does is you can apply an SMA. Basically, you can apply a smoothing to your indicator here. So let's see, instead of smoothing the SMA 14, let's see, how about if let me make some examples on our stochastic here. So let me set up another slope solver for that stochastic here. So I'll name this solver here. So this one's just looking at the SMA 14. And I'll grab a new slope solver. And this one will look at the stochastic. So let me change the indicator over to the stochastic. And let's see, the chart's just using 714.3. All right. Yeah, you know what? Actually, I didn't plan on this, but the stochastic, you know, the actual stochastic is the K. The D is a smooth K. So I can probably use the stochastic to help illustrate what the slope period is here. So let's see. Yeah, we'll take a look at the K. I'll set this to the K, and I'll need to go turn the K on so we can see it. Alright, the K is usually in orange, and let's make that a little thicker. Alright, so I'm going to go in and adjust my solver name here. So we're looking at the Stochastic K. Right, so, you know, pretty simple. When the K is sloping up, right, we get a long output. K starts to slope down, we get a short output. So now, let's see, I think, you know, I'm not positive on what the formula is for smoothing the K. So the D is a smooth K. I'm not sure what that formula is, but hopefully it's an SMA. So if it's an SMA, this is going to work out really good. So I'll change my slope period to 3, and let's see. Let's see. Let me adjust my indicator settings here. So yeah, maybe the D is a double smoothing. Let's just see what happens if I double those. And no, let's set the D to 1. Alright, well, this example is not quite working out as I had hoped, but we'll just continue on here. Alright, so yeah, maybe I can still salvage this example, but first I'm going to set up another slope solver that looks at the Stochastic D. Alright, so let's change this over to the Stochastic D. Alright, it's like so. Alright, so our Stochastic D is a little easier to see there. So we just have a very small period where the D is sloping up, right? So the D is the green line there. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our Stochastic K, and if I up this slope period enough, maybe we can get it to look like the percent D. And wow, voila. Okay, so I just had to match a 7 period. That, you know, okay. So I guess this percent or period D is a smoothing, that's a 7 period smoothing of our K. So let's take a look. Alright, so let's take a look at the D. So I'm connecting the D up, and draw a little box. So that's the upslope for the percent D, our green line. And now let's take a look at the percent K. So here's the percent K. Remember, we smoothed it by a 7-period SMA, and it actually matches up. So okay, yeah. So this, all right. So this example did work out as I was hoping it would, right? So that's what this slope period is doing. Is it's smoothing out the indicator plot that we're looking at, right? So in this case, we're looking at the this solver is looking at the stochastic K line, and then we smoothed it by 7, which then made it look like the stochastic percent D. So that's what that. There you go. That's what the slope period's doing. Yeah, I gotta say, just a little mental note. Yeah, that probably doesn't get much use there, but you might find it useful in some cases where if you do have an indicator that does really move around a lot, just kind of zigzags up and down a lot, and for some reason you think smoothing it out might be helpful. When you're looking at the slope, that's what that option's there for. Let's see. So we do have another kind of special output here. So let's see. Let's take a look. Actually, let me take a look at our. Let's take a look at our SMA 14 again. Here, and I'm going to remove the slope requirements. All right, so good. I got an example here. So we have 2 bars here where our SMA 14, which is the white line, is completely flat. Right. So once again, our SMA is completely flat. So if we do have the capability of looking for when an indicator is completely flat. So I can set, let's see, I'll set this output to 0.25, like so. And you can see here, right, if you look at the output down here from Bloodhound, we can see we get a long output and a short output that equals 0.25. So if we take a look at the price flags over here, right, they both equal 0.25 here. So if you do happen to have an indicator where when it goes flat, that's telling you something unique, you do have that capability to identify when it's flat. So what I could do, let's see, actually, here, let me just set up another slope solver. Let's drop that on here. So I'll change the name, and we're going to identify when it's flat. Alright, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to set this value at 0 slope, set that to 1, and the outputs in direction, I'm actually going to turn this off. I'm going to turn these outputs off. And now we have a way to identify when an indicator is completely flat, like so. Let's see, I can't think of any kind of practical indicator examples off the top of my head. It's pretty rare that it's pretty rare for indicators to go completely flat and identify some kind of condition, right? Most indicators are usually sloping up or down to tell you, if the price trend is up or down. Yeah, maybe something will come to mind, or if you guys have a suggestion of a flat indicator that actually kind of tells you something about price action, then I'll substitute that in here. All right, so let me move down to the two outputs here. So you can see these outputs. We have in direction and we have against direction section here. So I'm going to drop another slope solver down here. Connect this up. And so once again, I'll just use the SMA 14 here. So we can see, right, the default settings for the output is in direction, right? So the in direction just means that the output is going to be in the same direction as the slope of the indicator, right? So since our SMA is sloping up, the output is in that same direction. So the output is, you could say, is up as well, right? So the long output is typically associated with being up. So, right, and of course, when our indicator slopes down, the output is down. So the output is in the same direction as the slope of the indicator. Now we can reverse that if we want. So reversing it is different than using the invert. Right, so right, the invert is a little different. So what we want to keep in mind is these two bars here where there's no output. So let's actually mark this right here. So keep in mind right here. So if I invert this, right, we can see that the short output, it did reverse to a long, but since we inverted it, what happened here is, look, this flat area, we actually inverted it, and so we got a long and a short at the same time. So typically, if you want to reverse a solver's output, you typically don't want to use the invert option, just because of this right here, because right, the indicator's flat, but we got both a long and a short output, because that's what a true invert is. So if you want to reverse a solver's output, most of the solvers have an output option to actually reverse them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the in direction off, and I'll use the against direction here. Right? And just do something like that. So now you can see the output has been reversed, and our flat area here still has no output, so it's still flat there. Right? So I guess a practical use for using the against direction or reversing the output. A practical use would be if you're trying to build a counter trend signal here. So, counter trend signal being, for example, price is moving down, and you're trying to find like a buy signal here. So if you're looking at some kind of moving average, and your moving average needs to be sloping down in order to find a buy signal, basically a reversal point, then you would want to reverse the output of your slope solver, so that way you're getting a long output and of course the slope solver would need to be in combination with other solvers that are trying to identify your reversal point in price. But yeah, basically counter trend kind of signal is probably the typical use for reversing your output like this. Let's see. Yeah, how about if I'll go into a little more detail on using the min and max slope. So this really gets into using the fuzzy logic of bloodhound here. So I'll use the first solver up here to do that. So let's see, I'll put an extreme slope on here of 1 tick. Right. So basically our SMA has to have a really extreme 1 tick slope on that. So let's see, let me kind of go into detail on how you actually calculate the slope, on how you measure the slope. So to do that, I'm going to put a second SMA indicator on here. There we go. Alright, so you can see the SMA is on here twice, and one of them is a hash. So this hash actually identifies, right, the exact value of that SMA. Now the slope is measured in this distance here. So let's see, I'm going to have to really stretch things out here. So yeah, maybe I'll use an arrow here. Yeah. So this is how you measure slope on a chart. Basically, you take the value of so you take the value of the previous bar. So unfortunately, remember NinjaTrader rounds off. So using so actually looking at the little price marker, price flag that Ninja gives us. Kind of puts us at a disadvantage because it's rounding off, right? So it's 0.05. But so what you do is you take the the true value of the SMA there, which is goes out to many decimal points. You take that and you subtract it from the value of the next bar, and so in this case it's 0.04. So we know that we have approximately a 1 tick or 1 penny distance distance between that value and that value is approximately 1 tick distance, and so that is how you measure slope. Is you subtract the difference between those two values there. So that's why. Right, so that's why on this bar we actually got a short racing stripe here, or a short signal, because that distance was actually 1 tick. And if we look at our slope solver, right, remember I set the maximum slope, I set that to 1 tick. So we do need a 1 tick movement in order to get a racing stripe here, or in order to get a signal. All right, so that's kind of how the slope is measured. So now back to actually using these minimum slope and max slope here. So let's see. Let me put this to, if I put it to 1/4, and all right, so I just need to find an example on the chart here that I can use. And all right, here's a good spot. So if I look here, these several bars here, they have no output. And so the reason why is because I set my minimum slope to 0.25, right? So this slope here is basically 0.25 or less, and there's no output. Now when we do start to get an output, so right here on this bar, which is this bar, so now the SMA has at least a slope of 0.25 ticks. It has a slope of a little bit more. So because I'm starting to get an output here. So this output, so you see this analog type of output here, this is varying. So what this is telling us is that at least on this bar we have a quarter of a tick slope, and then eventually we get over here to this bar, and we can see that the output of Bloodhound is now at 1. So now when we get to this bar, we have a slope of 1 tick. We have a slope of 1 tick. And that's all determined by how we have our output in direction set. So let's see, let me get the display to update here. Right, so we can see that if we read the description down here, it says less than a quarter of a tick. So over here, you know, these bars over here, and let me line that up, right? So our SMA right here, it has a slope less than a quarter of a tick, and so we set the output to 0, right? So that's why down here the output is 0. There is no output because our slope is less than a quarter of a tick, right? So from a quarter of a tick down to no slope, so a quarter of a tick slope down to 0 slope, our output 0. Now when the SMA gets to, or actually when the SMA gets to just above a quarter of a tick, so right here, right, the slope of our SMA is actually one back. Let me go back one. There we go. So starting here, the slope of that SMA is just above a quarter of a tick of slope, and so therefore the output here is just above 0. So it's the output's slightly greater than 0, and when we get to 1 tick of slope, the output's going to be 1, right? So what Bloodhound's doing is it's creating a ratio from 0 to 1. All right, and we can see the output has the output reflects that ratio, going from 0 all the way up to 1 as the slope increases. So we can, let's stretch this out here. Yeah, I think that kind of helps. So we can see that there's kind of a curvature to the slope of our SMA as the slope begins to increase and increase and increase until finally the slope gets to 1 tick. And so what Bloodhound's doing is it's creating a ratio of a 0 value output to a 1 output. And we can see that right here. So these two different, minimum slope and max slope kind of allows you to create this kind of more advanced fuzzy logic approach in your system there, right? So what that allows you to do is it allows you to add some fudge factor to your system, right? So for example, if we just say, I need at least 1 tick of slope, right? So either the solver's, giving us an output or it's not, and there's no fudge factor allowed, right? So basically we've kind of created an absolute value with no fudge factor. And the way markets move and the way indicators move, it's there's always some fudge factor kind of involved in here. And so that's why Bloodhound has this fuzzy logic built into it. So fuzzy logic allows that fudge factor to happen with your indicators. So yeah, like for example, let's take a look at this bar here. So let's stretch this out. Right, so if we look at this short output here, if we look at the price flag, we can see the value is 0.81. So it's not quite at 1. So that means our slope here, even though it looks pretty steep coming down, so the slope over our SMA hasn't quite reached 1 tick. But what we're seeing here is that it's close enough to 0.1 ticks of slope that that it would be okay for your trade signal to go through, right? So this the fuzzy logic allows you to say, what, my indicator slope is close enough to qualify for taking that trade, or basically for creating that trade signal.